There's a particular kind of day that comes right after something enormous has happened. Not the day of the earthquake, but the day after. When you're walking through the house, checking the walls for cracks, touching things that used to feel solid, just to see if they still are. That's where we are right now. February 20th happened. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 0 degrees Aries, the one astrologers had been talking about for years, that landed. And then yesterday, the Venus-Jupiter trine gave us something unexpectedly warm in the middle of all that weight. A reminder that things can still be soft and generous even when the structure of things is shifting. And today, February 23rd, is the third morning in a row where you wake up inside something that hasn't finished settling yet. The dust from that conjunction is still in the air. Saturn and Neptune are still sitting right on top of each other in early Aries. Nothing about what happened 3 days ago has resolved itself into clean answers. And yet the sky today is doing something different. Not heavier. Not a continuation of the weight. Something more like fidgety, restless, a little unpredictable. The moon has been in Taurus since last night, which normally would feel grounding. Taurus moon wants to slow down, wants to put its feet on solid earth, wants to eat something good and stay close to what feels safe. And there's some of that available today. But the moon is also moving into a conjunction with Uranus this afternoon, exact at around 3:30 p.m. Eastern, and then sliding into Gemini tonight at 7:28 p.m. So the grounded Taurus energy is not quite landing the way a Taurus moon usually does, because Uranus is right there introducing a current of unpredictability underneath the surface. Uranus in Taurus, which is still active until later this year, when it finally moves into Gemini for good, has been the slow background hum of disruption running beneath everything. Disruption to finances, disruption to values, disruption to what we thought was stable and fixed and permanent. And when the moon hits Uranus in the daytime hours today, that background hum gets a little louder for a few hours. You might feel it as a kind of static, a restlessness in your chest that you can't locate the source of, an impulse to do something you hadn't planned on, a thought arriving from an angle you weren't expecting. This is not a crisis day, but it is a day that asks you to stay somewhat alert, a little flexible, and not too rigidly attached to how you thought things were going to go. Before we get deeper into today's energy, leave a like and subscribe if this kind of thing is useful to you, and drop "still standing" in the comments. Given what the last few days have brought, I want to see who's come through the other side of this week still grounded. Okay, let's talk about what's actually happening. If you've been feeling like your thoughts are doing something strange lately, like they keep circling back instead of moving forward, like you start a sentence and lose the thread halfway through, like your mind is working in a different rhythm than usual, here's why. Mercury is at about 22 degrees Pisces right now, and it stations retrograde in just 2 days. February 25th at 10:48 p.m. Pacific Time, which means today Mercury is essentially stopped. Not metaphorically stopped, literally barely moving through the zodiac. When a planet is about to station, it slows to an almost imperceptible crawl in the days leading up to that station. And Mercury stationing in Pisces creates a very specific quality of mental experience that's worth understanding so you can work with it rather than against it. Mercury in Pisces is already not operating in straight lines. Mercury rules how we think, how we communicate, how we process information. And in Pisces, none of that happens in a particularly linear way. Pisces thinks in images, in feelings, in impressions. It picks things up intuitively before it knows how to articulate them. It circles around an idea rather than going directly at it. Mercury in Pisces is a little like trying to have a precise conversation in a language made entirely of poetry. Something true is being communicated, but you have to feel it rather than pass it. Now add the retrograde station energy to that. When Mercury is this close to going backward, the mind turns inward. The processing that usually moves outward, turning internal experience into language, translating thought into action, taking ideas and putting them into the world, that outward motion gets very slow. And what replaces it is an increased awareness of what's already inside. Things you thought you'd already finished thinking about start surfacing again. Conversations from weeks or months ago replay with slightly different emphasis. Old ideas that you set aside because the timing wasn't right start asking for attention again. For the next couple of days before the retrograde officially begins, there's actually a window here that a lot of people miss. Mercury is still technically direct today and tomorrow, still technically moving forward, but moving so slowly that you got this unusual combination. A mind that's quieter and more inward than usual, but still in the phase where things can be communicated clearly and contracts can be signed and decisions can be made. That window closes on Wednesday night. So if there's anything you've been putting off that requires clear communication or clear decision-making, today and tomorrow are genuinely better days for that than Thursday or Friday will be. And more broadly, the quality of slowness that Mercury in Pisces stationing is producing, try to receive it as useful rather than frustrating. Your mind is lingering on things right now for a reason. The thing that keeps coming back, the thought that won't stay gone, the piece of something you keep turning over, that's not your attention malfunctioning. That's Mercury doing exactly what a nearly stationary mind in Pisces does. It's asking you to sit with something long enough to actually understand it, rather than just processing it and moving on. Around 3:30 in the afternoon today, the Moon makes an exact conjunction with Uranus at around 27 degrees Taurus. I want to spend some time on this because I think the Moon-Uranus conjunction is one of the most physically noticeable transits there is, especially when you know to watch for it. Uranus is the planet of disruption, sudden change, electricity, the unexpected. It governs the things that arrive without warning and rearrange something. Not in the deep structural way Saturn rearranges things, and not in the slow dissolving way Neptune does. Uranus is more like a lightning strike. Quick, illuminating, sometimes disorienting. And when the Moon makes contact with Uranus, whatever the Moon is governing, your emotional weather, your instinctive responses, your sense of what's safe and what's familiar, all of that gets a jolt of something unexpected. In Taurus, the Moon was trying to ground things, trying to settle. And Uranus in Taurus has been the disruptor of all of that settling. The thing that kept complicating the idea that stability was just a matter of working hard enough and staying careful enough. Because Uranus doesn't care how hard you worked. It introduces change at the level of circumstance in a way that's outside your control. And in Taurus, it's been doing that to everything related to resources, values, money, the physical world, the sense of secure foundations. The Moon conjuncting Uranus this afternoon might show up as an emotional response you didn't expect. Not dramatic necessarily, but surprising. You think you feel one way about something, and then at around that time in the afternoon, you get an unexpected piece of information, or a conversation takes a turn. Or something happens in your environment that makes you realize you feel something else entirely. That's very Uranus. It reveals what's actually true beneath the surface by disrupting the more comfortable version you'd been holding. It might also show up as an impulse, a sudden urge to do something differently, to change a plan, to respond to something in a way that surprises even you, to reach out to someone you hadn't been thinking about, or to say something you'd been keeping to yourself. Uranus in connection with the Moon brings the kind of action that bypasses the usual process of deliberation. You just do it and then figure out why later. This is worth being somewhat thoughtful about. Not suppressing the impulse, but just pausing for a breath before acting on it, if the action would have consequences that can't be easily undone. Moon-Uranus energy is real and useful, but it can also produce overreactions if you're not grounded. And with Mercury basically stationary and your mind already in a less clear-thinking mode than usual, it's worth factoring that in. There's also something genuinely exciting in this conjunction. Uranus brings liberation from stuck patterns. The Moon is your emotional body, your habits, your instinctive responses. When Uranus touches it, the possibility arises of responding to something in a completely different way than your pattern would usually dictate. of having a kind of emotional freedom that feels like suddenly seeing a room you've been in for years in different light. That's available this afternoon. Watch for it. Venus is still moving through Pisces, sitting at around 17 or 18 degrees, still in her exaltation, still in that open-hearted, unconditionally loving, somewhat porous mode that Pisces produces for her. But today, the quality of Venus's energy is a little different than it was yesterday during the Jupiter trine. Yesterday, Venus had an active partner. Jupiter was trining her from Cancer, and the two of them together were creating that unmistakable quality of warmth and ease and generosity that characterized the day. Today, the Jupiter trine has passed its peak. Venus is still exalted, still doing her Piscean thing, but she is more in a quieter phase, working internally rather than expressing outwardly. Venus in Pisces, that's not in an active major aspect, operates more like a background tone than a feature. It softens things. It keeps the emotional temperature from dropping too far even on days that might otherwise feel harsh. On a day with Moon conjunct Uranus introducing some restlessness and Mercury stationing producing some mental fog, Venus in Pisces is the reason the day doesn't feel cold or unpleasant. There's a kind of grace in the atmosphere that's easy to miss if you're focused on the more dynamic stuff. This is actually a good day for anything that doesn't require you to be outwardly expressive or socially on. Venus in this quieter mode supports the kind of creative or relational work that happens in private, the conversation you have with yourself, the creative project you're working through alone, the processing of a feeling you haven't quite been able to name, the quiet acknowledgement of what you love before you figure out what to do about it. And notably, Venus is going to be in Pisces until March 6th. So this quality of Venetian grace doesn't disappear today. It continues to be available as a resource through the beginning of March, through the Mercury retrograde, through the period when other things might be getting complicated or confusing. Keep that in mind. When things feel tangled communicatively over the next few weeks, Venus in exaltation is still in the background, providing something soft to land on. Here's the thing I keep coming back to when I look at today's chart as a whole. This is a day of multiple energies running simultaneously that don't quite harmonize, and that might actually be the point. You've got the Taurus moon asking for stability and groundedness. You've got Uranus interrupting that with disruption and electrical unpredictability. You've got Mercury nearly stationary, making your mind slow and inward. You've got Venus quietly generous and open. You've got Saturn and Neptune still conjunct in early Aries, asking what you're actually going to build and whether your foundations are real. And then tonight, the moon moves into Gemini, and suddenly everything speeds up again, gets more verbal, more curious, more scattered in that particular Gemini way. What the sky is asking of you today, I think, is a kind of adaptive presence, not having a plan and executing it. Not knowing how the day is going to go and sticking to the script, but moving through it with enough flexibility that when the Uranus interruption happens in the afternoon, you can actually use it rather than just feel knocked off course by it. When Mercury's slowness produces something unexpected in your thinking, you can recognize it as signal rather than noise. When the moon shifts into Gemini tonight and your mind suddenly wants to move fast and gather information and have conversations, you can give it that without losing the more important threads that the slower part of the day produced. This is actually what the Saturn-Neptune conjunction has been teaching in its big, multi-year, slow-moving way. Real structure isn't rigidity. Real discipline isn't forcing the predetermined plan regardless of what's actually happening. It's building something solid enough that it can absorb the disruptions, the unexpected revelations, the days when things don't go according to schedule, and still hold together. Today is a small version of that teaching, on a day-sized scale. The moon entering Gemini at 7:28 p.m. Eastern tonight is worth talking about on its own because it shifts the entire emotional register of the day pretty dramatically. Taurus moon, which has governed most of today, is slow, sensory, cautious. It wants to conserve energy and stay close to what's familiar and comfortable. It takes things in thoroughly before deciding what to make of them. And despite the Uranus interruption this afternoon, the overall quality of the day has that Taurus heaviness to it, a bit like wading through something denser than usual. When the moon crosses into Gemini tonight, the pace picks up. Gemini is quick, curious, social, verbal. It wants to process everything by talking about it or reading about it or exchanging ideas about it. The emotional weight of the Taurus day, whatever sat heavily in your chest during the afternoon, Gemini moon wants to move that through communication rather than sitting with it in silence. This is actually useful on a night that follows the kind of day that today is shaping up to be. Whatever surfaced during the Moon-Uranus conjunction this afternoon, whatever unexpected emotional revelation or surprising impulse arrived, tonight there's an impulse to make sense of it by putting it into words, to reach out to someone and try to articulate what happened, to write it down, even just in notes, to talk through the thing you've been circling around. The shadow of this is that Gemini moon can also skip along the surface of things without going deep enough. It can process through volume, more talking, more reading, more stimulation, without actually integrating what needs to be integrated. The Mercury retrograde that begins Wednesday is going to ask for real integration, real sitting with things. So while tonight's Gemini moon energy is a genuine gift for verbal processing and connection, it's worth being intentional about the depth at which you're engaging rather than just using the Gemini motor to stay busy. The moon in Gemini also forms a sextile to both Neptune and Saturn tonight, which is actually harmonious. A sextile is an aspect of opportunity, and the moon sextiling the Saturn-Neptune conjunction means the processing that Gemini moon wants to do tonight has access to both structure of Saturn and intuition of Neptune. That's a useful combination for any conversation or creative work or journaling you do this evening. The instinctive knowing that Neptune provides, the reality grounding that Saturn insists on, Gemini moon tonight can weave both of those into something coherent if you let it. Let me talk about who's feeling the specific energy of today most clearly, because it lands differently depending on where your chart picks up these placements. Taurus and Taurus rising. You're getting the Moon-Uranus conjunction directly in your first house today. Your sense of self, your identity, your physical presence in the world, that's where the jolt is landing. For some Taurus folks, this might show up as a sudden shift in how you feel about yourself, or how you're being seen. A moment where you see yourself slightly differently than you had been. Maybe an unexpected compliment, or an unexpected criticism that makes you realize something you hadn't consciously acknowledged. The disruption of self-image that Uranus produces in the first house isn't comfortable, but it's often clarifying. You needed to see that. The thing Uranus is surfacing in your first house has been there for a while, waiting for the right moment to be visible. Gemini and Gemini rising. The moon is coming to you tonight. And the moon entering your first house is always an emotionally heightened few days. You become more visible emotionally, more reactive, more tuned into what's happening in your immediate environment. With the sextile to Saturn and Neptune, the Gemini moon in your first house tonight has a quality of both feeling things very directly and also having access to a kind of wisdom about what you're feeling. Not just the emotion, but an intuitive sense of what it means and where it's coming from. That combination, emotional openness with intuitive depth, is actually quite powerful if you don't deflect it with too much surface-level activity. Pisces and Pisces rising. Mercury is in your first house barely moving, and Venus is in your first house in her exaltation. You have two personal planets sitting right on top of your identity, one of them about to go backward and one of them at her most open-hearted and gracious. The combination is creating something unusual in how you're experiencing yourself right now. A deepening, a slowing, a porousness that probably feels both beautiful and overwhelming depending on the moment. The Mercury retrograde that begins Wednesday is going to take you inward for several weeks, revisiting things in your own self-understanding that you might have thought were finished. Prepare for that journey rather than resisting it. Venus in your first through early March means there's something genuinely loving in that inward journey. Not just difficult, genuinely tender. Cancer and Cancer rising. You got Jupiter retrograde in your first house, still doing that internal expansion of identity and emotional foundation that Jupiter retrograde in Cancer produces. And Mars is also still moving through Cancer, giving you a directed, purposeful energy that doesn't always feel comfortable for a sign that's more naturally attuned to receiving than pushing. The moon moving into Gemini tonight lands in your 12th house, the private inner, behind-the-scenes house. Tonight favors solitary processing over social engagement for you. Let the Gemini moon do its verbal processing work in private rather than outward, write rather than talk, reflect rather than discuss. Virgo and Virgo rising. Mercury is your ruling planet, and it's barely moving in Pisces, your opposite sign. This is directly affecting you. The fogginess of thinking, the tendency to circle back rather than move forward, the unusual quality of your mental processing right now, that's your ruling planet essentially telling you to stop trying to organize and analyze your way through things, and instead let understanding arrive more intuitively. That is genuinely difficult for Virgo energy, which is built around discernment and precision and making sense of things in an orderly way. But the invitation of Mercury retrograde in Pisces, which begins for you in just 2 days, is to develop a different kind of knowing, the one that arrives through feeling rather than figuring. The Mercury retrograde through March is your opportunity to develop that side of your intelligence more fully. Sagittarius and Sagittarius rising, Saturn and Neptune are in your 5th house, the house of creativity, self-expression, romance, the things you do purely because they light you up. Saturn and Neptune conjunct in your 5th house over the past several days has been asking some pretty pointed questions about whether what you're creating is actually connected to who you genuinely are, or whether it's a more polished, more audience-facing version of yourself that's become somewhat disconnected from your actual interior life. The Venus-Jupiter trine yesterday probably gave you a glimpse of what it feels like when your creative expression and your authentic self are actually aligned. Today's quieter energy is a good day to sit with that glimpse and ask what would need to change to make that alignment more consistent. For everyone else, look at where Taurus, Gemini, and Pisces fall in your chart. The moon's journey from Taurus through the Uranus conjunction this afternoon and then into Gemini tonight is activating those areas for you. Where Pisces falls is where Mercury's station is happening, and where you're going to feel the retrogrades pull inward most strongly. And wherever 0 to 1 degrees Aries falls is where Saturn and Neptune are continuing to work, asking what in that area of your life needs to be built more honestly. One more thing worth mentioning because it's directly relevant to how you use today's energy. Today, February 23rd, we're at the first quarter moon phase. The moon is at roughly 90 degrees from the sun, a square. And while a lunar square sounds tense, the first quarter moon in traditional astrology isn't really about tension. It's about a decision point. Here's the structure of the lunar cycle. The new moon plants the seed. The first quarter asks whether you're actually going to commit to growing it. The full moon reveals what's been growing. The last quarter asks what needs to be released. The first quarter is the point where intention meets action, where the thing you set out to do in the last new moon cycle requires you to do something active to support it. And if you don't, it stops growing. The last new moon was the solar eclipse in Aquarius on February 17th, which was a genuinely significant lunation, eclipses especially so, that was asking what new beginning wants to be initiated. What's ready to be started that's going to become important over the next several months or even years. Today's first quarter square is asking, are you actually committing to that? Or are you still in the idea phase, the intention phase, the this sounds good in theory phase? The first quarter moon always introduces some friction. The square is the friction of reality meeting intention, of the thing being harder than you thought, or requiring something of you that you hadn't anticipated, or having complications that weren't visible from the vantage point of the new beginning. with the moon making this first quarter square from Taurus and the Uranus conjunction happening at the same time, the friction today might feel a little more electric than usual first quarter friction. Not just the ordinary challenge of turning intention into action, but a disruption in how you are planning to do it. Something unexpected arriving that changes the shape of the path forward. That's okay. Actually, it's better than okay. Uranus disruptions at the first quarter aren't random. They're often revealing that the plan you had wasn't quite right, and here's the more accurate shape of what you're actually building. The disruption is information. The unexpected thing that surfaces this afternoon is telling you something about the Aquarius eclipse intention that you needed to know before you got further down the wrong road. So when you feel that Uranus jolt this afternoon, don't just absorb it as an inconvenience. Ask it what it's trying to show you. Ask it what it's revealing about where you've been too certain, too fixed, too attached to the particular form you'd imagined the thing taking. I always want to be specific about this, because knowing what's in the sky is only worthwhile if it connects to what you're actually doing with your day and your week. This morning, with the Taurus moon still active and Mercury essentially stationary, the day favors slow, thorough, careful things. Not the kind of careful that's fear-based, the kind that's attentive, the kind that notices what's there rather than rushing past it. If you have anything that requires reading carefully, reviewing carefully, listening carefully, this morning is good for that. Around midday and into early afternoon, there's more of a square to Mars that passed in the morning hours, around 10:18 a.m. Eastern, that may have left some restlessness or frustration in its wake. A sense of wanting to move and feeling blocked from moving, or of direction being unclear. Don't force past that. The blocked feeling is sometimes the appropriate response to a day when Mercury is stationary and the moon is approaching Uranus. Forcing forward movement when the sky is asking for stillness tends to produce decisions you have to undo later. The Uranus conjunction in the late afternoon, 3:28 p.m. Eastern, is the most genuinely unpredictable window of the day. Keep yourself available for something surprising. Don't schedule anything irreversible or high stakes into that window, but do stay open. The unexpected thing that arrives has something useful in it. This evening, once the moon has entered Gemini, the energy opens up for conversation and connection and exchange. If there are conversations you've been needing to have that felt too heavy or too loaded earlier in the week, tonight actually has a lighter quality to it. The Gemini moon sextiling Saturn and Neptune gives those conversations both groundedness and intuitive flow. Things can be said tonight that would have been harder to say on Monday or Tuesday. And before you sleep tonight, write something down. Whatever the day surfaced, whatever the Uranus jolt revealed, whatever the Mercury slowness has been circling around, get it into words before the day ends. Mercury retrograde begins Wednesday night, and the things you captured in words before the retrograde are often the things that become clearest by the time the retrograde ends in late March. The retrograde is going to take you back over territory you've already covered. That's what retrogrades do. But the version of you that enters the retrograde, having written things down, having captured the insights before the backward motion began, that version of you is going to have a much easier time of the retrograde than the one who enters it with nothing written down and everything still just floating. It's worth stepping back briefly and seeing where today fits in the larger sequence. 3 days ago, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction fundamentally asked what you're actually building and whether it's real. 2 days ago, the Venus-Jupiter trine gave you warmth and expansion and a reminder that the building is in service of something genuinely good. Today, the Moon-Uranus conjunction introduces a note of disruption and unpredictability that's revealing something about the plan, some adjustment that needs to be made, some piece that wasn't quite right. And then Wednesday night, Mercury goes retrograde, and for the next almost 4 weeks, everything turns inward. Review, revisit, reconsider. That's actually a coherent sequence. It's not random. The universe resets something profound at 0 Aries on the 20th. it showed you the warmth and the value of what that reset is in service of on the 22nd. It's showing you what needs to be adjusted on the 23rd. And then Mercury retrograde from the 26th gives you the processing time to actually absorb all of that before the next outward movement begins. The next few weeks of Mercury retrograde in Pisces, running through March 20th, are going to be a deep inward journey. And Pisces retrograde periods have a particular quality that's worth knowing about in advance. They're not primarily about communication breakdowns or tech glitches, though those things can happen. They're primarily about the inner world, about what's been operating below the surface of your thinking, about the things you know intuitively but haven't yet been able to put into clear form, about the feelings that are wiser than your current analysis. That's actually a gift, especially in the context of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that just happened. Because Saturn-Neptune at 0 Aries is asking what you're going to build, and Mercury retrograde in Pisces is offering you several weeks of deeper than usual access to your intuitive knowing, your actual desires, the things that matter at a level below your logical planning. That's exactly the kind of access you need when you're trying to build something real rather than something that just seemed reasonable. So walk into this week, into the Mercury retrograde, into the several weeks ahead with that understanding. You're not in a phase of forward momentum right now. You're in a phase of deep listening, of integration, of understanding what you actually know before you commit to the next direction. That's not a setback. That's the most important kind of preparation. And for today specifically, Monday, February 23rd, stay somewhat flexible. Give yourself room for the unexpected in the afternoon. Use the Gemini moon tonight for gentle conversation or writing. Don't try to resolve everything that the last few days have stirred up. Some of it will resolve itself during the retrograde. Some of it will become clear by March 20th when Mercury goes direct. Let the process take the time it needs. All right. If this kind of content is useful to you, leave a like and subscribe, and drop "still standing" in the comments. I want to know how you're moving through this stretch of sky. Take care of yourself through this, and I'll catch you in the next one.